Pop that collar. Hello and welcome to What's with People with Doc Locke. I'm Dr. Stephanie Lockbuehler, social psychologist and queen of cursing. The goal of these videos is to give mini lessons on phenomena, theories, and topics in social psychology, which is the scientific study of the way that people think about, influence, and relate to others. Or, in other words, it's the science of why the fuck are people like that? This video is the second part to the last video, which was all about the question, what's with people talking about discrimination? I mean, I'm not racist or sexist or ageist, so this shit doesn't apply to me, right? A recap of what we learned.
We all have biases that we're often not even aware of. It's a normal part of being human. The problem lies in how these biases can easily impact our behavior without us also being aware of it. What exactly is discrimination? It's defined as positive or negative behavior directed towards a social group and its members. Prejudice. This is defined as positive or negative evaluations, or attitudes or feelings or reactions or emotions, of a social group and its members. When I ask someone how they feel about a group, what they are able to say is obviously conscious, it's controlled, they're aware of it. But science has found that we also have prejudice or bias that we might not even be aware of, and this is what's called implicit bias. Stereotype is a belief or an impression of a social group that people form by associating specific characteristics with the group. It starts with a stereotype, like blondes are dumb. This can lead to an emotion or prejudice, such as a distrust of a blonde woman's academic credibility, which can then lead to discrimination or the action of dismissing or questioning the woman's academic background just because she has blonde hair, okay?
This video focuses on how do our biases impact our behavior and what can be done to stop it? So let's get into it. How do the different types of biases affect our behavior? So you probably remember that explicit bias is the bias that people are aware of and can vocalize, like, I don't like that group. So it makes sense that explicit bias affects behavior in conscious and controllable ways, like someone who says they have negative beliefs about people of a certain political affiliation will actively call them mean names, or when someone says that they don't like gay people so they won't bake them a cake. Don't nobody want your dry ass cake anyway, Joan. Ya homophobe! Fuck you, Joan! Implicit bias, on the other hand, is unconscious and without our awareness, so it affects behaviors in less controllable, more automatic ways, in ways that we aren't aware of, and in ways that we might not know even have negative consequences, which makes them more harmful over time and in hidden ways. For example, in one study it was found that white students' nonverbal friendliness, something that they have less control over, towards a black person was influenced by their implicit biases, while their explicit bias, what they outright said about black people, influenced their verbal statements towards black people, which is more controlled. Another study found that when participants were shown either black faces or white faces and then shown a photo of either a handgun or a tool like a screwdriver or a wrench, when they had to press a key quickly to indicate whether the object was a tool or a weapon, they identified guns faster than tools when they were first shown a picture of a black face rather than a white face. But they also misidentified tools as guns more often when they were first shown a picture of a black face rather than a white one. This is because many have unconscious biases or stereotypes about black people as violent or crime-prone, and those implicit biases can impact automatic behavior, which can obviously have terrible consequences in situations that are perceived as potentially threatening, even when they are clearly not. Another study expanded on these findings and asked students to push a button as quickly as possible to shoot if a person on the computer screen had a gun, or to push a different button to not shoot if a person on the screen was unarmed, like holding a wallet or a cell phone. They found that people were quicker to shoot when the person was black than when they were white, but also unarmed black people were shot significantly more than unarmed white people. And they found that people were more accurate with shooting an armed black man than an armed white man. It wasn't just white people that made this mistake. This bias was just as prevalent among black participants too, because of how often that stereotype is portrayed in society. They learn the same things. But why are so many of your examples about race or gender or sexual orientation anyway, huh? Well, because they are the groups that experience the most discrimination in society, silly. It obviously doesn't mean that other groups aren't discriminated against. These findings are still relevant to other groups and shows that overall, implicit biases impact more uncontrollable or spontaneous or automatic behaviors without our awareness. Again, it's important to remember that everyone has biases based on stereotypes that they've learned over time. So even if a person has explicit attitudes towards a group that are positive, that doesn't mean that those stereotypes that they've learned over time from society can't have an impact on behavior. Being unprejudiced doesn't mean never having negative thoughts or feelings towards groups of people, but rather acknowledging them and making a conscious effort to avoid being influenced by them. And when you really think about it, it doesn't really matter whether the bias is conscious or unconscious or intended or unintended if the consequences are negative. Boom! Now, I'm sure that you've had experiences or even observed others experience how stereotypes and biases can have a negative impact on yourself or others. But surprisingly, there are people in this world that believe that discrimination doesn't exist, even after all this information and science and shit. Hubby. The reason for this is because it's really easy to think that prejudice and discrimination doesn't exist or to not believe the experiences that others are having if we haven't personally experienced them ourselves. Our own experiences are more accessible or they come to mind easier. So when we're presented with information that doesn't exactly line up with our own experiences, it makes it easier to just believe that they aren't real. Especially when that information makes us feel uncomfortable feelings like sadness or guilt or shame. Remember? People don't like to feel bad, and they will do mental gymnastics to get rid of those bad feelings. Cognitive dissonance. So we now know how stereotypes and biases can affect behavior, but what are some circumstances that could make people more likely to use them? Remember that stereotypes are mental shortcuts, so often they're used when people lack the motivation, the ability, or the time to fully process information. This is because we have two ways of thinking. We have fast and frugal and in-depth. So in-depth is the deliberate and controlled way of thinking, like when we spend time and effort into thinking about stuff. Like, when it's 2 a.m. and you're trying to go to bed and yet you're analyzing every single conversation that you've ever had. But most of the time we function on autopilot, not putting a ton of thought into everything that we say and do and think, which is why biases can have an impact without our awareness. But there's a good reason why we rely so heavily on our autopilot or fast and frugal way of thinking. It would be super exhausting to be constantly thinking of every little thing through to its fullest. It takes up a lot of time, and we'd probably become paralyzed with thought or at least be really friggin' slow at everything if we relied exclusively on in-depth thinking. Oftentimes, we just need to think quick, like when a clown jumps out of a trash can. Punch it in its face. Or when picking food from a crowded buffet line. That seriously annoys me when people take forever. I'm hungry! Or when quickly deciding on a YouTube video to watch. Oh, look at you. You chose me. Thank you for choosing me. But it's not just about timing. It's also found that when our mental capacity decreases, the likelihood of using stereotypes and biases increases. There's a whole lot of research that shows that certain situations may decrease our ability and motivation to fully process information and resort to using stereotypes and biases, like being under time pressure or experiencing an overload of information, or when experiencing strong emotions like anger or sadness or even happiness, or being tired or stressed out. I'm so stressed out. In these situations, our brains are often too overloaded or fatigued or have too much pressure for us to be able to put in the effort to really think shit through. So it's important for us to be aware of these situations so that we can have a better ability to check our decision making to make sure that we aren't being influenced by our biases. So by now you've learned about the process of discrimination, including what prejudice and bias and stereotypes are, how they're learned, how we find out about our own biases, how they affect our behavior, and under what circumstances. Now we will learn how to overcome them. And as I've mentioned before, awareness is key because without awareness, we can't do anything about it. Be aware. Be aware. Biases are very resistant to change. Not really surprising, huh? So it will take a lot of time and effort to unlearn them. This isn't oh, I watched the video and now I'm cured. This will require daily ongoing effort to make a change. It's kind of like trying to break a bad habit. The work's not really easy, right? And it can be uncomfortable to come face to face with the negative stereotypes that you've learned over time. The reason why they are so hard to change is because people are very motivated to maintain positive self-esteem, and they really don't like to be wrong or feel bad about themselves. So they often will seek and select and interpret and remember information that confirms what they already believe. Oh, look at this video. Oh, you should watch it. People also have a tendency to explain away inconsistent information to keep themselves from changing a stereotype. For example, meeting a gay man who doesn't fit the flamboyant or feminine stereotype can be explained away by saying that that person is just an exception to the rule. In another example, some studies have shown that when someone has a stereotypic belief and implicit biases regarding gender differences in ability, they attribute a man's success to their abilities, and they say that a woman's success was just because of luck. But you can work on overcoming stereotypes and biases by also educating yourself. And congratulations! If you paid attention and were open-minded throughout this presentation as well as the last one, you've already begun this step. Research has also shown that by learning about other groups and their experiences, you can reduce stereotypes and prejudice. This can be done by reading articles online or watching videos or documentaries or getting to know others. In fact, the contact hypothesis says that certain types of contact between members of different groups will reduce stereotyping, prejudice, and ultimately discrimination. There are literally hundreds of studies that show that interactions with people from stereotyped groups can reduce prejudice, though certain circumstances will make it more effective at doing so. That includes having multiple positive interactions or repeated contact rather than just like a couple one-offs, or having contact with multiple members of the group, or developing a close relationship or friendship, or even working together on a task. One study had participants interact with a former mental patient, a member of a group that they had negative stereotypes about, and had them work on a task together. The participants ended up liking the former mental patient, and it also decreased their negative feelings about the mental patient and other mental patients in general. But research has also found that even a single encounter can be enough to reduce prejudice, and even just imagining contact or watching TV shows with positive and stereotyping consistent information about group members is enough to reduce prejudice. Important PSA though, the best way to educate yourself through contact is to do it without burdening those of the group that you're learning about. Remember, their job is not to teach you how to be a good ally, it's your job to do the work yourself. So it's super important to keep an open mind. This includes being open and vulnerable enough to know that you may make mistakes and potentially say the wrong thing once in a while. The key is not to be afraid of those mistakes, because it's worse to be paralyzed with the fear of doing something wrong rather than being open to learning more and correcting those mistakes. An example of an error that people commonly make is saying things like, "I'm colorblind to race," or "I don't see color." While many people mean well by these kind of statements, this way of thinking actually erases the value of cultural diversity. Research has shown that cultural differences can foster a better work environment, it can increase productivity, improve task performance, and increase creativity, such as during brainstorming sessions, and creates a more inclusive environment that supports individuals' identities and creates relationships that are friendlier and more personalized. Another way that we can overcome our stereotypes and biases is by educating others. Research has shown that by teaching others what you know, you're able to retain the information better. But I mean, it's just also good to help others understand how stereotypes and biases can affect them, right? Also, by making a conscious effort to overcome your biases, you will also be indirectly teaching others how to do the same. Of course, you can also help educate others by calling people out or speaking up when you see people doing or saying shit that is based on incorrect or harmful stereotypes and prejudice. All right, so what are the 4 key takeaways from all of this? Number 1, discrimination and prejudice does exist, often under our awareness. It's easy to think that prejudice and discrimination doesn't exist or to not believe the experiences others are having if we haven't personally experienced them ourselves. But look, discrimination isn't new. It's been around since the beginning of time. But I like to think that we're smarter now, at least some of us are, and we can educate ourselves on this shit to overcome it. Number 2, we may feel uncomfortable when learning or talking about this topic, but it's necessary for us to be mindful of those emotions and to make sure that those emotions don't prevent us from being open to the information and experiences of others. Number 3, while it's natural and normal for us to have stereotypes and biases, we must become aware of them to make sure that they don't have an impact on our behaviors. Awareness is key. And number 4, we can overcome the impact of our stereotypes and biases by making ongoing and daily effort to be aware of them, by educating ourselves and by educating others and holding them accountable. Again, this video and the previous one alone aren't enough to cure you of any biases that you have. It really does require daily, ongoing effort to unlearn the shit that's been learned over time. So keep on learning! You can also check out whatswithpeople.com. Got a resources section there. I'm going to put in a bunch of resources for you, some things that you can watch that will help you on your journey. Thank you so much. I love you. Bye! Gotta be aware. You gotta be aware. Awareness is key. I don't have my microphone. I lost my mic. Duh.